Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakha Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Isaiah, the 42nd chapter. As we went through in the 41st chapter, basically just going into, as it says, Israel encouraged, right? So we went into the Lord basically speaking about how he would deliver Israel, right? And also emphasizing the worthlessness of these idols, right? And so on and so forth. This is Isaiah chapter 42, verse 1. Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. And this here is dealing with Yahushai. Okay, the servant here is referring to Yahushai, as it says, whom I uphold, mine elect, which the word elect goes into the word chosen, but that's what it means, right? When you elect someone, you choose them, as it says, in whom my soul delighteth. I have, why? Because he was the spirit, the first spirit created of the Heavenly Father, right? His only begotten. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles, right? Which these Gentiles here are dealing with Israelites, okay? Them being in that lost state. That's why they were referred to as the lost sheep of the house of Israel, okay? So the judgment here, meaning the justice, okay, being brought to these Israelites here. And this was a prophecy, right, concerning what Yahushua would come to do. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. And what this means is, not that Yahushua wasn't going to speak, but he wasn't going to draw attention to himself, right? He wasn't, when he came on the scene, roughly 2,000 years ago, it wasn't so that he could be made known per se, right? Or be the most famous person on the scene, which is why there are numerous accounts where Yahushua would caution people not to make known what he has done, right? And in certain areas he would sneak out, right? Certain times scriptures refer to when he was in a city and they wanted to make him king and he had to sneak away because it wasn't his time to be glorified, okay, at that point. Even when his mother desired him to perform the miracle when they ran out of wine at the, I believe it was the marriage or so. And he was reluctant to do it, right? Because as he explained to her, it wasn't his time, right? That wasn't his time to be glorified. So that's what it means by him not crying, nor lifting up his voice, nor lifting up, nor causing his voice to be heard in the street. And a precept for this here, when you go into the book of Matthew, the 12th chapter, right, it pretty much breaks it down and tells you exactly what this is. It's like a direct reference. So this is Matthew chapter 12, verse 14. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him, which this is referring to Yahushua. But when Yahushua knew it, he withdrew himself from thence, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all, and charged them, right? So he commanded them that they should not make him known, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah, which is Isaiah, the prophet, saying, Behold my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall shew judgment to the Gentiles. See, so that was referring to Yahushua, which is something he would fulfill. And that's why we're reading what we're reading of here in the book of Matthew. And like I mentioned, it's literally almost like word for word in Isaiah 42 and 1. And when you go into the word elect, it literally means chosen. Okay. As you can see, chosen, choice one, chosen one, elect of God. So back in Matthew 12, Yahushua did this to fulfill that prophecy that we're reading of in Isaiah 42 concerning himself. He shall not strive nor cry, neither shall any man hear his voice in the streets. See, so that's why, as I mentioned, he charged them that they should not make him known. So when you look at the life of Yahushua, when he came on the scene, and when I say came on the scene, I mean when he came on the earth, right, through the union of Joseph and Mary, and you look at the way he lived, it was according to the script, i.e., the things that were prophesied about him in the Old Testament, or as the scriptures refer to it, in the law and the prophets. So he moved according to that to fulfill those things. Hence, you have the example here of, and that's why now you understand why, or one of the reasons why he didn't want to be made popular, right? Why he would charge people, be it demons or even just people that he healed, to not make it known that it was him that did that, or what he had done there. Okay, so before continuing here, let's go back to Isaiah 42. Actually, let's just finish it off in Matthew and then go back. A bruised reed shall he not break, and smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory. And in his name shall the Gentiles trust. So we know these Gentiles here are referring to actual Israelites, which we call them Israelite foreigners, but they were Israelites, some that had, or most that had lost their way, right? And so through the gospel or the message or the doctrine of Yahushua, those that heard and believed, right, would trust in the Lord and would come back into knowing that they were Israelites, and so on. So going back to Isaiah 42 and 3, understanding now that this is referring to Yahushua, reading this part again, a bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. Now, a bruised reed, right? When you go to the ancient world, a reed was used for, many things, right? Used for a musical instrument, i.e. like a flute, right? Or sometimes even like a pen, or for different uses. But oftentimes, if people saw a reed that was like bruised, in this case, like crushed, it was considered useless, right? So they would just either break it up and just throw it somewhere, or not really, or in other words, they would discard it, right? And as it says here, and a smoking flax shall he not quench. So a smoking flax is basically the what's the word I'm looking for here? The thing inside of the ancient world's version of a candle or a lamp. I think, was it a wick? Yeah, a wick. So if I type in here, Bible lamp wick, get some images on that, something like this, right? So you'd have that wick that it's dipped into the oil, right, over there, and it's burning slowly until it basically gets snuffed out. And so this smoking flax, the actual imagery of that is likened onto a wick that's been burned all like so low that now it just looks like, just like smoke, right, on the flax. It's just so little left. Usually, right, the way that people who use this at the time is they would just snuff it out and then get a new one, right, to start the fire on that for the lamp. But here, what the scripture is saying is Yahushua wouldn't do that, right? And the bruised reed and the smoking flax were a representation, in a metaphorical way, of the state of Israel, right? In particular, those that were considered outcasts, or quote quote Gentiles, or those that were lost, right? So they were like on the brink of basically being gone. So far gone that you had other Israelites that considered them to be Gentiles, right? And that's the brink of being, for lack of a better word, useless, right? In comparison to what you should be, right? What is the ideal state you should be in versus the state they were in? So when you look at a bruised reed, the ideal state is that it's firm and strong and it's not crushed, versus the state that it's in, which is bruised. Then it's considered to be so far from the ideal state that it's useless, or it's discarded. Similarly, same thing for the smoking flax. It's basically at the end of its journey, so people just discard it. But here it's signifying that when Yahushua would come on the scene, those that were likened onto being in this state right, are those that he would not condemn, right, or discard, or just kick them to the curb, but rather heal them. And that's why he mentioned they that are whole have no need of a physician, right? So he came to those that were broken of a contrite spirit that he could heal them. That's why it mentions him not breaking, right, the bruised reed. And as it says, he shall bring forth judgment unto truth, right? So basically to instill proper and righteous judgment. I like to think of it like if judgment was a bar or a person, right? And you had, say, like a spectrum, right? You had a spectrum on the left and on the right, and on the left was lies or wickedness, and on the right was truth. You can imagine judgment being standing in the side of the spectrum of lies, and him dragging it, right, for a mental visual, him dragging that bar or that judgment to the side of truth, so that judgment would be executed in righteousness. So, for example, what is an example of judgment in falsehood? Somebody being wrongfully accused, or somebody being judged against for bribery or whatever the case is, right? Corruption and perverseness, versus judging righteous judgment, disregarding the status of the person, no respect of persons, and just judging according to righteous judgment. That's an example of judgment unto truth, right, or justice. And that's what Yahushua came to do. Verse 4, he shall not fail nor be discouraged till he have set judgment in the earth. And so that's why you see in the life, right, when Yahushua was on the earth and how he lived, he was always, and when it says fail, it's like to falter, right? So Yahushua was always resolved in his mind to do the will of his Father, which was his mission that he was sent on the earth to fulfill or to accomplish, right? Until that was done, he didn't rest. He didn't give heed to anything else. As he said, his meat was to do the will of the Heavenly Father that sent him. So that's why it says he shall not fail nor be discouraged. Now, somebody might say, well, what about when he went up to pray, because he was getting weak concerning the crucifixion, right? The judgment, the struggle he would have to go through. Well, if he was discouraged, right, in the sense that is meant over here, he would not have gone through with that, right? So because of the resolve at the end of the day, he still went through with it. Okay, and that's why when he was finished with it, he said, "It is finished," right? He has completed his task. And as it says, till he have set judgment in the earth, right? And that judgment being righteousness. So how did the Lord do that? Well, by him coming on the scene and doing what he did, it was like a catalyst, right? He set it off in motion by teaching his disciples, the disciples who became apostles, and spreading the gospel. And then by going on the cross and unlocking our ability to gain the Holy Spirit and increase our understanding, that that knowledge that was taught and that doctrine that was taught back then extends all the way up until now, right? So Yahushua set it all in motion. And how is it going to end? Well, by the truth being gone out, and the spirit of truth now being readily available to us. And in this time, us hearing it and waking up, ultimately the elect, that is, hearing it and waking up, they're going to be delivered, right, at the return of the Lord. And they're going to be the ones under Yahweh Ba'asham Yahushai to instill proper judgment in the earth, right? So this was all a process that was set off by Yahushai that would lead to the proper and complete justice and judgment in the earth. And the isles shall wait for his law, right? And the isles being like the islands or the various lands, or shall wait for his law. Really, in other words, like shall hope, right, upon that law. Because even looking at the state of the world right now, it's the scriptures say that when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. But when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. Roughly paraphrasing. Hopefully I didn't mix that up, right? So the creature is earnestly expecting this, right, as it says, for his law, because that's going to bring righteousness and peace in the earth again. Verse 5, thus saith God, the Lord, he that created the heavens and stretched them out, right? And what that means by stretching out the heavens is meaning he enlarged it, right? He made it spacious. Like right now, if you look in the heavens, it looks like it goes on forever, right? He that spread forth the earth and that which cometh out of it, spreading forth the earth, in other words, to create, right, or bring it forth, and everything that cometh out of it, right, all life that is on the earth, he that giveth breath unto the people upon it, and spirit to them that walk therein, which is saying the same thing in two different ways, but the Most High is the one who gives us life, who gives everything that has life, right? I, the Lord Yahweh, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee. And when you read this in the NLT, which makes it a bit clearer, it says, I, the Lord, have called you to demonstrate my righteousness, right? So it is through Yahushua that the righteousness of Yahweh is demonstrated or pushed out throughout the world. I will hold thine hand and will keep thee, right? So in other words, holding your hand, meaning to lead you, and to keep you, meaning to protect you, and give thee, which is still dealing with Yahushua, for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles. Now, when you read in the New Testament, right, or even in the Old Testament as it was prophesied, the new covenant that the Lord set up with the nation of Israel is through Yahushua, right? As it says, I will give thee for a covenant of the people. The old one was through the sacrifice of rams and lambs and bullocks, but this new one is through Yahushua, right? So through Yahushua, the covenant is we are now able to be adopted back to the Father, right? We're now joined back to the Father through this agreement or this covenant, which is Yahushua, which is why those that believe in Yahushua are likened unto those partaking first of that covenant, right? And then ultimately, as it says, it applies to the whole nation, but it is through Yahushua, as the Apostle Paul mentions, whereby we cry, Abba, Father, right? Because we have received the spirit of adoption. That's through Yahushua. For a light to the Gentiles, that light meaning representing truth, right? Or knowledge, or the path to righteousness of the Gentiles being Israelites. Okay. Now, when you, what precept was it? Have seen a great, right? This is Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2. As it reads, the people that walked, actually, I'll start at 1. Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation. He's talking about Israel. When at the first, he lightly afflicted, he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan and Galilee of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. These people that walked in darkness are Israelites. Walking in darkness meaning they didn't have the truth. They didn't have the fullness of the understanding or the way back to Yahweh Ba'asham Yahushai, right? Have seen a great light, and that light was Yahushai. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. This light shining upon them was fulfilled in Yahushai being or there among them and teaching them. Okay, that was likened onto this light shining upon them. So going back to Isaiah 42 and verse 6, for a light of the Gentiles is referring to Yahushai being that light or that way of truth. Verse 7, to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. Now, when Yahushua came on the scene, I know I keep saying he came on the scene, but when Yahushua, during his time, as it says, he opened the eyes of the blind, right, or the blind eyes, which he did literally, right, but also spiritually. And so you had one example is, yes, you had members of the elect that were there, but they still needed the Lord to open their eyes in that generation. And so when you look at the Apostle Paul, for example, before his name got changed to Paul and he was known as Saul, he was blinded, right? And it's spiritual that the Lord had it to where physically he became blind for a period of time. And then the Lord opened up his actual physical eyes, right? But at the same time, his spiritual eyes. So it's a spiritual, thing there, how the Lord had it to where he got knocked off his horse and was blinded for a period of time. And then when the Lord opened up his physical eyes, it was also basically how the Lord opened up his spiritual eyes and he was able to see. So long story short, that's what Yahushua did, right? He opened up the blind eyes by teaching this truth. So having your spiritual eyes open is likened onto hearing this word and seeing it and actually perceiving it and understanding it, to bring out the prisoners from the prison. And in this case, the prisoners or the captives from this prison is another way of referring to the blinds having their eyes opened, right? Because the strongest prison that was upon our people was the bondage of mental captivity, right? Of being subject. I think it's referenced here in the book of, is it Romans 8? Yep, I have it on here, right? But before I mention the precept, I want to finish the point, right? So as it says here, bring out the prisoners from the prison. So the Lord bringing this truth and teaching us the proper way to serve the Lord in spirit and in truth, freed our people, right, from the spirit of bondage that they were in. So now, segueing into Romans chapter 8, verse 15, for ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but ye have received the spirit of adoption. So how did that spirit of adoption come by? It was through Yahushua. So that is an example of also freeing the prisoners from the prison, right? From that bondage that we were in, being slaves to sin, right? And in turn death. But through Yahushua, through us learning of a better way, and through the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father, we have now been made free from that. Another precept here is John chapter 8, verse 31. Then said Yahushua to those Jews which believed on him, if ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed. And if ye shall know the truth shall make you free, right? In order to be made free, you had to have first been bond or captive. So what did the truth make you free from? It wasn't necessarily physical bonds, right? But the mental chains of darkness, of living bound to a lifestyle of sin and not having the way out of that, right? So you're being constantly subject to the effects of sin, right? And death, and constantly repeating that cycle was likened onto us being in that prison or that mental stronghold. But by the way of truth, we've been able to escape that. We've been made free from that. Verse 33, then they answered him, we be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? Yahushua answered them, verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. In other words, you still have that, that spirit of bondage. And the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth forever. If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. Okay, so going back to Isaiah 42:7, this was the Son making us free, bringing out the prisoners from the prison by way of this truth. And them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. So what was that darkness? That darkness was being in a state of mental darkness, right? Not having the way of truth and ultimately being lost, which is why Israel is referred to as the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Verse 8, I am the Lord Yahweh, that is my name, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. Yeah, so the Lord is to be glorified and first and foremost, right? And so The Lord hates when you give his glory or his praise, as it says, to graven images. And that's what Israelites did, which pissed off the Lord. One example was Jeroboam. And he did explicitly this, which the Lord hates. He built golden calves and told Israel, these calves, these idols, which are nothing, literally nothing, are the ones that brought you out of the land of Egypt. So you worship and praise them. He took the glory that was given to the Lord, that belonged to the Lord, because the Lord is the one that brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And he attributed it to these graven images or these idols, which is why when you read in the book of Kings, Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, his name is constantly mentioned in comparison to wickedness, because he did a great deal of wickedness in doing that. Verse 9, behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare. So here is saying that the former things, the things that were mentioned of old, prophesied of old, are come to pass, right? They've been fulfilled. And new things, new prophecies, new things that are about to happen, do I declare, do I tell you of. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. And as a matter of fact, Isaiah the 42nd chapter is an example of this, where the Lord revealed it to his prophet, the new things he was about to do. And before they happened, before they sprung forth, he told them of it. Verse 10, sing unto the Lord Yahweh a new song, and praise and his praise from the end of the earth. Ye that go down to the sea, and the reason it says go down to the sea is because when you look at the actual geographical region where Jerusalem was, it was known as a hill country for a reason. It was on a higher elevated level. So to actually go down to the coast or the plain that leads to the sea, you have to descend. That's why he mentions that go down to the sea, and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof, right? So all those that are seafaring merchants, fishermen, all that, people that dwell in these lands connected to the sea, all the things in the sea, let the wilderness and the cities thereof lift up their voice. The villages that Kedar doth inhabit. Kedar was an Ishmaelite. So here his name is just a representation of the region where the Ishmaelites inhabited, which I believe was southeast of Israel. Let the inhabitants of the rock, when you go into the word rock, I think it's Selah, which is referring to a region, let me pull it up, where I think later on the Edomites came to dwell, right? So that region south of Israel. Let's see where we're at. I think I got the wrong verse. Oh, okay. The inhabitants of the rock. Yeah, Selah. The rock, a place in Edom, perhaps an early name for Petra. Okay. So continuing, says here, let the inhabitants of the rock sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory unto the Lord Yahweh and declare his praise in the islands. So what Isaiah is doing here is, right, he's saying let everybody praise the Lord, right? From those that dwell on the seas to the islands that are around, to the neighboring villages and the neighboring cities, all of them, everybody basically glorify the Lord and sing this new song. Now, how that actually is manifested, or what that represents, is really the elect, right, of the Lord in the four corners of the earth. Because that's pretty much what Isaiah is saying, right? All you neighboring, anybody around, because remember, the inhabitants of the sea, the villages of Kedar, Selah, these weren't in the land, like in Jerusalem, but they were around, right? So in other words, the Israelites that were scattered, in all different areas, because they were the ones who would fulfill this in wherever region they were, would praise the Lord, right, and sing that new song, starting with the prophets, right, because that new song being this doctrine that we're teaching, but also the believers in the various lands where they have been scattered would glorify the Lord, right, as it says, let them give glory unto the Lord Yahweh and declare his praise in the islands. So in whatever lands where they were dispersed amongst, and you see that happening even up until today, or especially now, today. The Lord Yahweh shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. And that stirring up jealousy, that word jealousy is like zeal, right? Like passion, like extreme, anger, like an adrenaline rush. And to stir it up, meaning to inflame it, right? Or to get it to the most potent version or level of it. He shall cry, yea, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. Verse 14. I have long time holden my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. Now will I cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. Right? And so as it says here, right, leading from verse 13 into 14, right, the Lord is going to go forth as a mighty man, and he shall prevail against his enemies, right? So nobody's going to really stand a chance against the Lord. There's a precept that mentions who shall not be utterly beaten to powder at his presence. As it says, I have long time holden my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. And it's a sentiment that's echoed or felt, right, by Yahweh Yahushai. Okay. But in the refraining himself, Yahushai has been at the right hand of the Father. And no matter how eager, right, or how much he wants to come down, he can't until he gets that green light. But when he does, as it says now, which in this verse, Isaiah is prophesying about that point of the Lord's return. Now will I cry like a travailing woman. So this is post the Lord coming on the scene 2,000 years ago, going back to the spirit world, and his return to bring judgment. So crying like a travailing woman is not crying with tears, right? But it's that when you look at a woman that's in labor, she's screaming with all her might, right? So you see her her fists are clenched, if she's holding on to something, she's holding it real tight. She got veins, she's sweating, she got veins popping up, her face is turning red. She's basically using every ounce of her energy to push, right? And scream. So you can see the intensity on her face. Similarly, when you have somebody that is like going to war or in war and they have that adrenaline rush, because that's what it does, right? That when you yell, you scream, your heart starts beating faster, you have a rush of adrenaline that can obviously like soothe pain and so on and so forth, different use cases. But a similar visual is likened onto one that is like in war or in some form of a hype moment where they have that, like, they have that visual like a travailing woman. As it says, I will destroy and devour at once. Now, I want to see if, I don't know if it'll let me. If not, I might have to crop this part out. But let's see. Screaming woman in labor. Do not show me anything vulgar. Okay. All right. This is not bad. Okay. So, as long as they don't show anything crazy. So you can see her face. 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 Right. And the point here is the intensity. Okay. Of that you can see that this scream or this cry that they're giving out is not one of just emotion, but it's using, you can feel it in their spirit, right? They can feel it in their spirit. So looking at this, and another visual that comes to mind is I don't know if I can pull up the scene, but let me see if I can pull it up. Wolverine adamantium scene. Yeah, this is the scene right here. Let me see if I can. I don't want any copyrights, so I'm just going to skip right to the point. And if anybody's seen this movie, you know the reference, right? So they basically give Wolverine this adamantium steel, and then they say wipe his memory, right? And when he hears that, he basically loses it, and he goes wild. So this scene right here, let me see if I can just pause on the face. Yeah. So you see the scene right here. You see the scene right here, right? Different situations, but there's that this equivalent, right, of like that cry, that scream that you're letting out, and there's this great rush of adrenaline, right, that's going through. So just wanted to give a visual, right? When it says cry like a travailing woman, it doesn't mean somebody that's crying in tears, but it's like a war cry, right, of intensity. And that's to signify the rage and the zeal in which the Lord is gonna let out at his return. So coming back to Isaiah 42 and 14, I will destroy and devour at once. So the Lord is not going to hold back. He's not going to be calm. He's not going to try to reason. He's going to come to bring judgment with fierceness and wrath. And that's why those words are used in Isaiah the 13th chapter to describe the day of the Lord. I will make waste mountains and hills, and this is both literal and in the symbolic sense, right? The physical, actual mountains and hills will be broken down and destroyed at the return of the Lord because of the intensity of the destruction that he's going to bring along with him. But also the mountains and hills representing governments, right, and bodies of these heathen nations and so on. They're going to be made waste, right? Those in particular target areas when the Lord comes back, and will dry up all their herbs, because the Lord is going to be using fire. The scriptures tell you that in Isaiah 66, with fire and with a sword, right, is the Lord going to plead with all flesh. So the grass, the land, the parks, they're all going to be burned up. And I will make the rivers islands. In other words, he's going to dry them up, and I will dry up the pools. With in Malachi 4, it tells you that the day of the Lord is going to burn as an oven. So that heat is going to dry up, certain bodies of water. Do you think that the reservoirs that they have on this land are going to survive after the destruction of this place? Of course not. Verse 16, and I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not, and I will lead them in paths that they have not known. And the blind here are representing the elect, right, Israel. And the Lord is going to bring them by a way they knew not. So it's like an actual blind person being led to a path that they're not familiar with. But here, this way that they knew not is the way to salvation, right? And this is something this is a road or a path we didn't know or have access to, save through Yahushai. That's why it says, I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not, and will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them. See, so the Lord is going to lead us in the paths that we have not known, which is the paths of righteousness. Having been in wickedness for so long, it was likened unto something foreign, but the Lord is going to lead us down that path by way of opening up our minds and also giving us the understanding of the scriptures, of the truth, because that is what is able to make us wise unto salvation. I will make darkness light before them. So that represents the Lord taking us out of a confused and destroyed state, specifically mentally, or mainly mentally, and bringing clarity and knowledge and wisdom before us, right? So now we have the ability to see through the darkness that we're in, and we're no longer subject to living in a state of darkness. When you when you look at the lives that we lived before, we were living in darkness. Yes, we still eat, we still have the same names, right? We still have to do what we have to do in this world, but we live differently than we did before, because before we were going through the motion of life in darkness, versus now going through it in the light, walking in the light of righteousness. And crooked things straight, right? And a crooked thing is something that's out of place. That's why you can easily spot it, right? If something is crooked, you can easily tell, yeah, that thing is crooked, that thing is bent. And usually when something is crooked, it doesn't signify something good, right? If you open up your hood and you see a bar and it's really bent or it's really crooked, they'll tell you probably need to replace that, right? When a car gets hit, parts of it become crooked. You need to replace that. You need to make it straight again. So what it signifies is the Lord basically taking the things that are not right, that are not normal, and setting them in their proper order again, right? Setting them right and correct again. These things will I do unto them and not forsake them, because the Lord said, he promised us, right? He said that he would deliver us through Yahushai. And so by believing in Yahushai, we know the Lord is not going to forsake us. Verse 17, they shall be turned back, they shall be greatly ashamed that trust in graven images. So now here's a contrast, right? Those that trust in graven images, a graven image is an idol. And it's usually referred to as a graven image because the idols in the ancient world were actually carved, right? You would take the tree, you would cut it down and carve it. But when it says a graven image, in today's day and age, you have modern day idols, though they're not always in the form of a physical graven image. But the term graven image is like come to be associated with an idol. And people have modern day idols, right? Which go into these false gods and false religions that they are stuck in. So those that trust in those graven images, that say to the molten images, ye are our gods. So these, as we went into in Isaiah 41, these idols that are quite literally nothing, they put their trust in them. They're going to be ashamed in seeing that those pseudo gods are really no gods. They have no power, and they can't defend or protect you when the wrath of the Lord comes. Hear ye deaf, and look ye blind, that ye may see. Right. And that's our people, right? Hear, give ear unto the speech of the Lord. Look, perceive, and understand, so you can see, you can find the way of truth. Similarly, in Revelation 3:20, the Lord said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man open right unto me, I would come in and sup with him. And when the Lord sups with you, that's when your eyes are open and you can see. Verse 19, who is blind but my servant, or deaf as my messenger that I sent? Who is blind as he that is perfect, and blind as the Lord's servant? And to put this in terms easier to be understood, it's like the Lord saying, there's nobody more blind than my own people, right? Like, who is more blind than you? Those that I chose to be my servant. And it's signifying the irony, right? To say that those that the Lord chose to be his servant, right? Or his messengers, those of the nation where his prophets come from, right? Those that were made to be perfect above all other nations, yet they are the most blind. To go as far as to say they're even more blind than these heathens here. So you have heathens, for example, that would understand certain parts and see, yeah, I can see these people being the chosen of the Lord. I can see why this makes sense. And yet you have our people who are the actual chosen people, and they can't even see it. Okay. So as it says, who is blind, or who is as blind as my servant, or deaf as my messenger that I sent? So from prophet down to average, regular, non-prophet Israelite, at one point we were all in this state, right, of being really, as it says in Ezekiel 37, a valley of dry bones. We were all in this state of blindness, or spiritually deaf, and not understanding the words of the Lord. Who is blind as he that is perfect, and blind as the Lord Yahweh's servant, right? So, and this is referring to us, right, who were made to be perfect, and yet we were all blinded at some point in time. Verse 20, seeing many things, but thou observest not, opening the ears, but he heareth not. Right, that's going into our people that don't give heed to the words of the Lord. Meaning the Lord he's literally putting it right before you, making it as plain as can be, and yet they don't observe it. They see it, but they don't take heed to it. They hear it, but they don't listen. They don't. It's like opening up their ears literally and screaming into it, and yet they're not taking heed to those words. Verse 21, the Lord Yahweh is well pleased for his righteousness' sake. He will magnify the law. Yeah, and how is he going to magnify the law? Well, ultimately, he's going to make it the law of the world. So as to where people now reproach it and treat it with contempt, in the kingdom, that's not going to be the case. The Lord is going to establish this way of living as the way of righteousness, and it's going to be honored, as he says here, and make it honorable. But this is a people robbed and spoiled. And how are we robbed and spoiled? Well, we've been robbed of our identity, our nationality, our land, pretty much everything we have, and spoiled. Right? We were brought down and made subject to these nations, made a prey, made slaves, made servants. But they are all of them snared in holes, and a snare in a hole. A hole is a trap, right? It's like sometimes you have a ditch and you cover it up, sort of like what they did to Joseph. And then you either, if it's an animal, you put some bait, or you just leave it in an area where it looks like it's regular land. Somebody eventually is going to fall into it. So our people have been snared in holes. They are hid in prison houses, right? There goes the prison again. Now, in today's time, literally you have our people in prisons, but you have more of our people in these mental prisons, right, than you do physical prisons. And so by Esau Edom primarily pushing out these false doctrines, these other beliefs, that is ensnaring our people, right? And that is like trapping them in these mental prisons. And when you look at our people today, once they fall into that belief and they believe it to be true, even though it's a lie, it's like actually being in prison. And the more eloquent or the more deceptive the practice is, right, or the belief is, it's like the stronger or the more severe the lockdown of the prison actually is, to where it doesn't matter what you tell them, they're always going to keep on going back to that thing that they believe in. Islam is one example, right, which has a strong hold upon our people. So no matter what you tell them or how well you explain the scriptures or how much you prove to them things in their belief that don't add up, they'll still go back to it because it's likened on to them being in prison and they can't be broken out of it. Save, the Lord actually opens the gate and brings them out of it, as he did for us, right? Lord willing, we're of the elect, but for us who have been woken up from being, in the world. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none saith restore. And that was the case, right? We were made a prey, and nobody intervened. When you look at what they did to the Northern Kingdom here in the Americas, right, the natives, or what they did about what's it called, the Trail of Tears, or even what they did with the transatlantic slave trade, we were made a prey. They came there, they grabbed us up, they sold us, they made us slaves and all of that. And nobody intervened and said, hey, take these people back, give these people their land back. Nobody did that. Verse 23, who among you will give ear to this? Who will hearken and hear for the time to come? So Isaiah is saying, who's going to listen to this message, right? Who is going to take heed to these prophecies for the times that are ahead? Who gave Jacob for his spoil and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord Yahweh, he against whom we have sinned? Now, real quick, to back that point up, let's get this in the book of Baruch, chapter 4, verse 6. Ye were sold to the nations, right? Given up for a spoil. Ye were sold to the nations not for your destruction, but because ye moved God to wrath. Ye were delivered unto your enemies. For ye provoked him, right? What was that? Against whom we have sinned. Ye provoked him that made you by sacrificing unto devils and not to God. So, as Isaiah is saying here, the Lord is the one who gave us up for a spoil and to the robbers, because we sinned against him. For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law. Time and time and time again, the Lord would send prophets. He would warn them. They wouldn't take heed. They wouldn't listen. They're doing the same things today. I can care less. I don't give a F what it is you're saying or what you believe in. It ain't got nothing to do with me. I'm going to live how I want to live. That's them not walking in the ways of the Lord. They're not obedient unto his law. They get mad at you when you tell them about the law of the Lord. Verse 25, therefore he hath poured upon him, the him here is referring to Israel, the fury of his anger and the strength of battle. And it hath set him on fire round about. So the Lord is, in other words, the Lord has brought judgment upon us. The fury of the Lord's anger, whether it's plague, whether it's another nation, as it mentions the strength of battle. So being besieged, being taken captive, being killed. And it hath set him on fire round about. So we've been affected by this wrath, which is likened unto being actually set on fire. Yet he knew not, and it burned him, yet he laid it not to heart. So the burning and the fire is feeling the wrath of the Lord in the various judgments, be it in captivity, be it in famine, be it in destruction. But as it says, yet he laid it not to heart. So as our people go through these bad and traumatizing events, which are the wrath of the Lord, they don't consider and say, hey, maybe this is a result of us living this wicked lifestyle. Let us stop, because this might be what's angering the Lord, which is why he keeps us in this position. Even though we're telling them exactly that, they're not laying it to heart. They're not considering to say, let us repent from our wicked ways and turn back to the Lord. And that's why in Isaiah, I believe the 1st or the 2nd chapter, he mentions, why should ye be stricken anymore? Ye will revolt more and more. So the more wickedness you do, the more you get judged, the more wickedness you do. And that's why at the end of it all, the Lord is going to need to purge the nation of Israel. So that brings us to the end of the book of Isaiah, the 42nd chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodesh. And until next time, Shalom.